The blood-type tag saved her life, but destroyed theirs forever. But what nobody expected was that this worn leather purse, mocked by an entire restaurant full of wealthy diners, contained a secret so powerful it would expose a decades-long conspiracy and bring down one of the city's most respected families. Meet Alina Rodriguez, a 67-year-old cleaning lady who worked 3 jobs just to afford her medication. Every evening she would sit in the corner of Belle Court, the city's most exclusive restaurant, waiting for her daughter Camila, a waitress who was ashamed of her mother's appearance. Alina carried the same cracked leather purse she'd owned for 40 years, a purse that made wealthy customers whisper cruel jokes and her own daughter cringe with embarrassment. What they didn't know was that Alina was a war refugee who had survived horrors they couldn't imagine. That purse wasn't just old, it was a reminder of everything she'd lost and everyone she'd saved. Sewn carefully inside the lining was a small fabric tag with O written in faded blue thread, along with something else that would soon shake this community to its core. The night everything changed started. Like any other, Alina sat quietly, ignored by everyone except the cruel stares and whispered comments about her pathetic old bag. Camila served tables while shooting embarrassed glances at her mother, wishing she would just wait outside. The wealthy Hartwell family, who owned half the businesses in town, made particularly loud comments about people who don't belong in decent establishments. But then Captain James Mitchell walked in, a decorated army medic just returned from overseas. When he saw Alina collapse suddenly, clutching her chest, everyone else stepped back in disgust. James rushed forward, and in his desperate attempt to save her life, he discovered what was hidden in that mocked purse. What he found didn't just shock him, it revealed a truth so devastating that 3 generations of lies came crashing down in a single moment. If you believe that respect should never be based on appearance, SMASH, that LIKE button now. Comment. Heroes hide in plain sight. If you're ready to discover how one purse destroyed an empire of lies, subscribe because this story will shatter everything you think you know about judging people by what they carry. This isn't just about an old purse. It's about a woman whose past held secrets that powerful people would kill to keep buried. But for Alina to understand how this moment would change everything, we need to go back to where it all began. Alina Rodriguez had survived 3 wars, 2 revolutions, and 1 impossible choice that saved hundreds of lives, but nobody in this small American town knew any of that. She arrived in Millbrook 25 years ago with nothing but her daughter Camila, then just 8 years old, and that leather purse that would later become the subject of so much mockery. Alina spoke broken English and took any job she could find, cleaning offices at dawn, washing dishes at lunch, scrubbing floors at night. Her hands were permanently stained from industrial cleaners, her back permanently bent from years of labor, but Alina carried herself with a dignity that confused people. Despite her worn clothes and thick accent, there was something almost regal about the way she moved, something that suggested she hadn't always lived this life. The other cleaning ladies noticed how she could calm any situation, how she seemed to know exactly what to do in medical emergencies, how she carried herself like someone who had commanded respect in another life. The purse was her constant companion, a weathered brown leather bag with scratches that looked almost like bullet marks. Inside, she kept her work permits, a rosary, photos of people she'd lost, and enough medication to stock a small pharmacy. Alina suffered from a rare heart condition that required expensive treatment, but she never complained, never asked for help. Camila, now 33 and desperate to fit into American society, had grown increasingly ashamed of her mother's background. She'd legally changed her last name from Rodriguez to Rivers, telling people her mother was just the help when pressed. Camila worked at Bellacourt, hoping to marry into wealth, and Elena's presence there was a constant reminder of everything. She wanted to escape. The Hartwell family had noticed Elena's quiet dignity too, but it made them uncomfortable. Victoria Hartwell, the matriarch who controlled most of the town's businesses, would make cutting remarks about people who don't know their place. Her son Richard would loudly wonder why the help was allowed to sit in the dining room. They sensed something about Alina that threatened their carefully constructed social hierarchy. What none of them realized was that Elena's medical condition wasn't just requiring expensive treatment, it was getting worse. The stress of working 3 jobs while watching her daughter deny their heritage was literally breaking her heart. And hidden in that mocked purse was evidence of who she really was. Evidence that would soon make the Hartwell family's worst nightmares come true. The night everything changed. Alina had been feeling chest pains all day, but she couldn't afford to miss work. As she sat in her usual corner, watching Camila serve the people who looked down on them both, she felt the familiar crushing sensation spreading across her chest. The Hartwell family had built their fortune on a lie so monstrous that 3 generations had dedicated their lives to keeping it buried. Victoria Hartwell, 72, sat at her usual corner table in Bellacourt, like a queen, surveying her kingdom. With her perfectly coiffed silver hair and designer clothes, she commanded respect through fear and money. But beneath her polished exterior lurked a woman who would destroy anyone who threatened her family's secrets. Her son Richard, 45, had inherited both her ruthlessness and her paranoia, while her grandson Tyler, 22, was being groomed to continue the family tradition of hidden cruelty. What made the Hartwells particularly dangerous wasn't just their wealth. It was their obsession with maintaining their reputation as the town's most charitable family. They funded hospitals, sponsored scholarships, and held elaborate charity galas. But this philanthropy was carefully calculated to cover up the source of their original fortune and the horrific acts that had made it possible. Victoria had noticed Alina from the very first day she started coming to the restaurant. Something about the older woman's bearing, her quiet dignity, the way she carried herself despite her circumstances, triggered a deep anxiety in Victoria. She began making increasingly cruel comments about Elena's appearance, encouraging other wealthy patrons to join in the mockery. This wasn't just snobbery, it was a deliberate campaign to humiliate Elena into leaving. Richard had taken his mother's paranoia even further. He'd hired a private investigator to look into Elena's background, but the man had found nothing beyond her immigration records and work history. Still, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that Elena represented some kind of threat. He'd started pressuring restaurant management to ban Elena from the premises, claiming she was bad for business. The most disturbing part of their campaign was how they'd manipulated Camila. Victoria had begun offering Camila small opportunities, catering jobs for wealthy clients, connections that could advance her career, but always with subtle hints that these opportunities might disappear if her embarrassing mother continued to be a presence in their social circle. But the Hartwells' greatest fear wasn't about social embarrassment or business reputation. Hidden in Victoria's private safe were documents that revealed the true source of their wealth: stolen assets, forged papers, and evidence of war crimes that her father had committed decades ago in Eastern Europe. Assets that had belonged to families who were murdered, people who had trusted the wrong person at the wrong time. The night Alina collapsed, Victoria's first instinct wasn't concern, it was terror. As she watched the elderly woman clutch her chest, Victoria's mind raced with possibilities. What if Alina died right there in the restaurant? What if paramedics searched through her belongings? What if someone discovered something that could connect Alina to the Hartwell family's buried past? Victoria grabbed Richard's arm with surprising strength. "We need to get out of here," she whispered urgently. Now. But it was already too late. Captain James Mitchell was already kneeling beside Elena, already reaching for her purse to find her medical information. The moment Captain James Mitchell's fingers touched Elena's purse, Victoria Hartwell's carefully constructed world began to crumble. Elena lay unconscious on the restaurant floor, her breathing shallow and irregular. While other diners backed away in disgust or pulled out phones to record the drama, James immediately went into combat medic mode. He needed to find her medical information, any allergies or conditions that could help paramedics save her life. His hands moved quickly through the purse's contents, searching for medication bottles or medical cards. Victoria watched in horror as James pulled out prescription bottles, reading labels aloud to help the arriving paramedics. Heart medication, blood THINNERS ... double quotes. But then his fingers found something else. Hidden in a small interior pocket, sewn carefully into the lining, was a fabric tag with more than just a blood type. "Oh, negative," James called out, but his voice caught as he read the faded text beneath. Dr. Elena Kozlov, Chief Medical Officer, Resistance Unit 7, 1943 to 1945. His hands trembled as he realized what he was holding. Below that, in different handwriting, were numbers that any military historian would recognize. Prisoner identification numbers from Nazi concentration camps. But it was the small photograph tucked behind the tag that made James's blood run cold. A young woman in a doctor's coat, standing next to a group of soldiers and civilians. In the background, barely visible, was a younger version of the man he'd studied in military history classes. SS Oberfuhrer, Klaus Hartwell, Victoria's father. Victoria had moved closer, desperate to see what James had found. When she glimpsed the photograph, her face went completely white. She lunged forward, trying to grab the purse, but James instinctively pulled it away. "This woman saved lives," he said quietly, his voice filled with awe. "She's a war hero." "That's impossible," Victoria snapped, her composure finally cracking. "She's just a cleaning lady. She's nobody." But her reaction told James everything he needed to know. This wasn't coincidence. Victoria knew exactly who Elena was, and she was terrified of what that meant. Richard had appeared at his mother's side, his face pale as he saw the photograph. "We need to leave," he whispered urgently. "Now, before anyone else sees this." But James was already connecting the dots. Elena's last name was Rodriguez now, but the medical tag said The photograph showed her treating wounded partisans, with Klaus Hartwell visible in the background. The timing, the location, the fact that the Hartwells had tormented this woman for months, it all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. As paramedics loaded Elena onto a stretcher, James carefully placed the purse's contents back inside, but he'd already memorized what mattered. The woman everyone had mocked and dismissed was Dr. Elena Kozlov, a legendary resistance doctor who had saved hundreds of lives and documented Nazi war crimes. and the family that had spent months trying to humiliate her into leaving town were the descendants of one of the war criminals she'd helped expose. Victoria and Richard slipped out of the restaurant as the ambulance arrived, but James saw the pure panic in their eyes. They weren't just embarrassed, they were terrified. As the ambulance doors closed and Alina was rushed away, James realized that her collapse might not have been entirely natural. The stress of months of deliberate humiliation, the psychological warfare the Hartwells had waged against her. Alina opened her eyes in the hospital 3 days later to find Captain James Mitchell sitting beside her bed, and she immediately knew her secret was out. "Dr. Kozlov," James said softly, using her real name for the first time in decades. Elena's eyes filled with tears, not from pain, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being recognized for who she truly was. For 25 years, she had been invisible, dismissed, mocked. Now a stranger was looking at her with the respect she had earned but never received. James had spent those 3 days researching everything he could find about Dr. Alina, the resistance doctor who had operated on wounded partisans in bombed-out buildings, the woman who had documented Nazi medical experiments and smuggled evidence to Allied forces, the hero who had saved 347 lives before being captured and sent to a concentration camp, where she continued treating fellow prisoners until liberation. "I know who you are," James said quietly, "and I know who they are." He showed Alina printouts of historical documents he'd found, including testimony she had given about Klaus Hartwell's war crimes. "His daughter Victoria has been tormenting you for months. She knows exactly who you are." Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "I came to America to forget, to give Camila a normal life. But when I saw her name in the newspaper, saw the Hartwell Foundation's charity work," she paused, struggling with the weight of the truth. "I couldn't stay silent knowing they built their fortune on stolen gold, on the belongings of people. Klaus murdered." That's when James met Rosa Martinez, Elena's unlikely ally. Rosa was a night janitor at the hospital, invisible to most people just like Elena had been. But Rosa had been listening to Elena's stories for years, had seen the photographs Elena sometimes looked at when she thought no one was watching. Rosa had always suspected there was more to Elena's past than cleaning offices and scrubbing floors. "She's been saving newspaper clippings," Rosa told James. "Every article about the Hartwell family's charity work, every mention of their business deals, she's been documenting everything, like she was building a case." Elena nodded weakly. "In my country, we learn to always keep evidence, always document the truth, even when it's dangerous." She looked at James with eyes that had seen too much. "Victoria knows who I am. She's been trying to drive me away because she's afraid I'll expose what her father did." James felt a chill as he realized the implications. "The heart attack? Elena, were you taking your medication regularly?" "The stress," Elena admitted. "The constant humiliation, watching my daughter be ashamed of me, knowing these people were living off blood money while I cleaned their floors, ... She closed her eyes. "I thought maybe it would be better if I just disappeared." But Rosa leaned forward, her voice fierce with determination. "No, you survived a war to tell the truth. You don't disappear now." She pulled out a small recording device, "and you won't have to fight alone. I've been recording their conversations for weeks." James stared at the device. What conversations? Every cruel thing they said about Elena, every time they talked about getting rid of the problem, every time Victoria mentioned her father's wartime investments. Rosa's eyes blazed with righteous anger. "They think cleaning ladies are invisible. They think we don't matter, but we see everything. We hear everything. And now we have proof." Elena looked at both of them, the soldier who had recognized her worth and the janitor who had become her secret ally. For the first time in 20 years, she wasn't alone. The truth was finally going to come out, and the Hartwells' empire of lies was about to crumble. What Rosa had captured on her recordings would destroy the Hartwell family forever. But it was just the beginning of what they discovered. Over the next week, while Elena recovered in the hospital, James and Rosa worked together to uncover the full scope of the Hartwell conspiracy. Rosa had access to the family's private offices through her cleaning job, and James used his military connections to dig into historical archives. What they found was far worse than anyone could have imagined. Rosa's recordings were devastating. Victoria's voice? Crystal clear. "That woman is a threat to everything we've built. If anyone discovers who she really is, if they connect her to my father's wartime activities, we'll lose everything." Richard's response was equally damning. "Maybe it's time for another accident. People her age have heart problems all the time." But the recordings revealed something even more sinister. The Hartwells hadn't just inherited their father's stolen wealth, they had been actively using it to silence other survivors. Victoria's voice, cold and calculating. "The Rosenberg family in Miami was getting suspicious about their grandfather's missing assets. The car accident was unfortunate, but necessary." James felt sick as he realized they were listening to confessions of multiple murders. Rosa had also photographed documents she'd found while cleaning Victoria's private office, bank statements showing transfers to offshore accounts, legal papers for property purchases made with assets that historical records showed belonged to Holocaust victims, and most damning of all, a leather journal that belonged to Klaus Hartwell. himself. Listen to this, Rosa whispered, reading from photos she'd taken of the journal pages. The Kozlov woman continues to document our medical procedures. She is becoming a significant liability. When the camp is liquidated, ensure she does not survive to testify, but she did survive. James. She survived to tell the truth. James had used his military clearance to access classified war crime tribunals. Elena's testimony from 1946 was still on file, detailing not just Klaus Hartwell's crimes, but also the location of assets he had stolen from murdered families. Assets that were never recovered. Assets that had somehow made their way to America and formed the foundation of the Hartwell fortune. The most shocking discovery came when Rosa found Klaus Hartwell's original immigration documents in Victoria's safe. He hadn't just escaped to America, he had been helped by a network of sympathizers, who had provided him with a new identity and the stolen gold he needed to start his new life. The Hartwell Foundation, presented to the world as a charitable organization, was actually a money laundering operation designed to legitimize Nazi gold. But their investigation had not gone unnoticed. Rosa called James in a panic. They know. Victoria came to the office tonight, started going through her files. She asked me if anyone had been asking questions about Elena. I played dumb, but she's suspicious. James realized they were running out of time. We need to move fast. If they suspect we know the truth. That's when Rosa made a discovery that changed everything. Hidden behind a false back in Victoria's desk drawer was a current list. Names, addresses, and status updates on Holocaust survivors and their descendants. People who might have knowledge of Klaus Hartwell's crimes. Next to Elena's name was written, neutralized cardiac event, successful. James stared at the document, his blood running cold. They didn't just drive Elena to a heart attack through psychological torture. They planned it. They wanted her dead. But at the bottom of the list was something that made Rosa gasp. Her own name, with a note, potential witness, recommend immediate action. They weren't just investigating the Hartwells anymore, they were being hunted. And Elena, still recovering in the hospital, was completely vulnerable to their next move. The plan to expose the Hartwells had to be executed perfectly, because if they failed, Elena, Rosa, and James would all end up like the other accidents on Victoria's list. James moved Elena to a secure wing of the military hospital, telling the staff she was under protective custody for national security reasons. It wasn't entirely a lie. Elena's testimony could reopen dozens of war crime cases and recover millions in stolen assets for surviving families. But Elena refused to hide while Rosa remained in danger. She risked everything to help me, said her voice stronger now that she was off the medications. The Hartwells had been subtly pressuring her doctor to increase. I won't let her face this alone. Rosa had discovered something crucial during her final night cleaning the Hartwell offices. Victoria was planning a massive charity gala for the following weekend, honoring local heroes with media coverage, and city officials attending. It was the perfect opportunity to expose them publicly, in front of the very community they had deceived for decades. But the Hartwells were moving fast too. Rosa overheard Victoria on the phone. The hospital situation needs to be resolved tonight. Make it look like complications from her condition. James realized they were planning to kill Elena before she could recover enough to speak publicly. That's when Elena revealed her final secret. I didn't just document Klaus Hartwell's crimes, she told James. I recorded them. She directed him to a safety deposit box she'd maintained for 40 years, using a key hidden in her purse's lining. Inside were original audio recordings of Klaus Hartwell discussing his plans, admitting to murders, and detailing where he had hidden stolen assets. James listened to the crackling recordings with growing amazement. Elena had secretly recorded dozens of conversations while pretending to be too weak and traumatized to understand what was happening around her. I learned to be invisible to survive, Elena explained. But invisible people see everything. The recordings weren't just evidence of Klaus's crimes. They included conversations with accomplices, including the names of American officials who had helped him escape justice and establish his new identity. The conspiracy went far deeper than anyone had imagined. Rosa had been documenting the Hartwells' current activities, but now she shifted to active sabotage. She planted recording devices throughout Victoria's office and home, capturing conversations about their plans to eliminate Elena and Rosa. She also began copying financial records, showing how Nazi gold was still being laundered through the Hartwell Foundation's charitable activities. The most dangerous part of their plan involved Camilla. Elena's daughter had been completely unaware of her mother's true identity, but she was also the Hartwells' weak link. Victoria had been courting Camilla for months, promising her career opportunities and social advancement. But Rosa discovered that Victoria's real plan was to marry Camilla off to Tyler Hartwell, ensuring her permanent silence about anything she might learn about Elena's past. We have to tell her the truth, James argued. She deserves to know who her mother really is. Elena shook her head sadly. Camilla chose shame over truth. But when she sees what the Hartwells really are, when she understands what they did to her own mother, Elena's voice hardened with resolve. She'll have to choose again. And this time, everyone will be watching. The gala was in 3 days. They had evidence that could destroy the Hartwells, but they also knew Victoria was planning to eliminate them before they could use it. As James coordinated with federal authorities and Rosa gathered final pieces of evidence, Alina prepared for the performance of her lifetime, one that would either bring justice at last or cost them everything. The moment Alina Rodriguez walked into the Hartwell Foundation gala, the entire room fell silent because the woman they thought they had destroyed had returned as Dr. Alina Kozlov, war hero. She entered through the main doors, flanked by Captain James Mitchell in full-dress uniform and Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI's art crime team. Alina wore a simple black dress, but around her neck was something that made Victoria Hartwell's blood freeze. Klaus Hartwell's Iron Cross, the one he had received for medical services at the concentration camp where Alina had been imprisoned. The transformation was stunning. Gone was the hunched, defeated cleaning lady. Dr. Alina Kozlov stood tall, her silver hair styled elegantly, her eyes blazing with the authority of someone who had stared death in the face and refused to blink. The room buzzed with confusion. Who is this distinguished woman, and why did she look so familiar? Victoria tried to maintain composure, but her hands were shaking as she approached the microphone to begin her speech about honoring local heroes. That's when Alina stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. Yes, Victoria, let's talk about heroes, and let's talk about the monsters they fought. The room erupted in whispers as Alina continued. My name is Dr. Alina Kozlov. For 25 years, I have cleaned the floors of this town, been mocked for my appearance, dismissed as invisible, but I survived Auschwitz. I documented Nazi war crimes, and I have been waiting 25 years for justice. Victoria's face had gone completely white, but she tried to maintain control. This woman is clearly confused, suffering from some kind of delusion. Am I? Alina's voice cut through Victoria's protests like a blade. She nodded to James, who activated a large screen behind the stage. Klaus Hartwell's face appeared, young and smiling in his SS uniform, standing next to stolen artwork and gold bars. The room gasped collectively. This is Klaus Hartwell, Victoria's father, SS Oberfuhrer, Klaus Hartwell, who murdered 847 people and stole millions in assets to fund his escape to America. Alina's voice never wavered as more photographs appeared. Documents, bank transfers, property deeds, all showing how Nazi gold had been laundered into the Hartwell fortune. But then, Alina played the recordings. Klaus Hartwell's voice, speaking in accented English, filled the ballroom. The Jewish assets will be transferred through the American contacts by 1947. The Kozlov woman must not survive to testify about the medical experiments. The room was in complete shock, but Alina wasn't finished. Victoria Hartwell hasn't just inherited her father's stolen wealth, she has continued his work. She has murdered other survivors who threatened to expose the truth. Agent Chen stepped forward with arrest warrants as Alina continued. Rosa Martinez, who many of you have never noticed because she cleans your offices at night, has been recording Victoria's confessions for months. Every cruel word, every admission of guilt, every plan to silence those who knew the truth. Rosa appeared from the crowd, no longer invisible, her recording device held high as Victoria's voice filled the room. The old woman is becoming a problem. Another heart attack would solve everything permanently. Victoria finally lost control, screaming, "She's lying. That woman is nothing. She's nobody. She cleaned toilets." But her desperate protests only made her guilt more obvious. That's when Camila stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Mama," she whispered, using the word she hadn't spoken in years. "I'm so sorry. I'm so ashamed of what I became." Alina embraced her daughter as federal agents handcuffed Victoria, Richard, and Tyler Hartwell. The stolen artwork on the walls, the gold fixtures, the very building itself. All of it was evidence of crimes spanning 3 generations. But the most powerful moment came when Alina addressed the crowd one final time. "You mocked an old woman's purse without knowing it contained the evidence to bring down an empire built on murder. You saw a cleaning lady instead of a doctor who saved 347 lives. Today, you learn that heroes don't always look like what you expect, and monsters don't always look like what you fear." As the Hartwells were led away in handcuffs, the crowd erupted in applause, not for the charity gala, but for the true hero who had been among them all along. 6 months later, the Hartwell name had been erased from every building, scholarship, and foundation in the city, but Dr. Alina Kozlov's name now appeared on the Holocaust Memorial Museum's Wall of Heroes. The trials had been swift and merciless. Victoria Hartwell received life in prison without parole for conspiracy to commit murder and crimes against humanity. The evidence Rosa had gathered proved she had orchestrated the deaths of at least 12 Holocaust survivors and their descendants. Over the past 30 years, Richard received 25 years for his role in the conspiracy, while Tyler, who had been unaware of his family's true history, testified against his grandmother in exchange for a reduced sentence. But the real victory wasn't in the courtroom, it was in the lives that were transformed. The Hartwell assets, worth over $200 million, were seized and distributed to Holocaust survivors and their families worldwide. Alina personally oversaw the return of stolen artwork to museums and descendants of the original owners. The gold that had funded Klaus Hartwell's American dream was finally returned to its rightful inheritors. Rosa Martinez became the town's first Latina city councilwoman, elected on a platform of giving voice to the invisible workers who keep society running. Her campaign slogan, "We see everything, we hear everything, we matter." The recording equipment she had used to expose the Hartwells was donated to the Smithsonian as an example of how ordinary people can fight extraordinary evil. Camila had undergone her own transformation. She publicly apologized for her treatment of her mother and quit her job at Bellacourt to become a volunteer coordinator for immigrant services. "I spent 33 years running for my heritage," she said in her first interview. "Now I spend every day trying to honor it." Captain James Mitchell left the military to become director of the Alina Kozlov Foundation for Hidden Heroes, an organization dedicated to finding and honoring unrecognized survivors of atrocities. His first initiative was a program to record oral histories from elderly immigrants, ensuring their stories would never be lost or forgotten. But perhaps the most significant change was in Alina herself. At 67, she enrolled in medical school to update her credentials. Determined to practice medicine again in America, her first day of classes made national news. But Alina was more proud of a smaller victory. Her new students called her Dr. Solve from the very beginning. The old leather purse that had started it all was retired to the Holocaust Memorial Museum, displayed alongside Alina's original medical instruments and the recordings that had brought down the heart. A small placard read, "Sometimes the most powerful weapons against evil are the things we carry with us every day." Alina's health had improved dramatically once the stress of hiding her identity was removed. She moved into a small apartment near the hospital where she volunteered, training young doctors in trauma care. Her first lecture to medical students was titled, "How to See the Invisible Patient." The town of Millbrook had to reckon with its own complicity in the Hartwells' crimes. How had they celebrated a family built on murder? How had they allowed a war hero to be humiliated in their midst? The community response was swift and decisive. The former Hartwell Memorial Hospital was renamed the Alina Kozlov Medical Center, and every year on the anniversary of her exposure of the conspiracy, the town held a day of recognition for overlooked heroes. But Alina's greatest victory was personal. Standing in the same restaurant where she had been mocked and humiliated, she looked around at the faces that now watched her with respect and admiration. The invisible woman had become impossible to ignore, and in doing so, she had ensured that the victims of Klaus Hartwell's crimes would never be forgotten. As she prepared for the final chapter of her extraordinary life, Alina knew that sometimes, justice takes decades to arrive, but when it does, it transforms not just the guilty, but everyone who witnesses truth triumph over lies. Today, Dr. Alina Kozlov practices medicine at the age of 68, but more importantly, she has taught an entire generation that heroism often hides in the most unexpected places. 3 months after the trials ended, Alina received her American medical license and opened a free clinic for immigrants and refugees. Her waiting room is always full, not just with patients, but with people who simply want to meet the woman who proved that dignity cannot be destroyed by cruelty, that truth cannot be buried by wealth, and that justice may be delayed but never defeated. The leather purse that saved her life and destroyed an empire of lies now sits in the Smithsonian, visited by thousands who learn that the most ordinary objects can carry the most extraordinary power. Children press their faces against the glass, reading about the cleaning lady who was actually a war hero, the janitor who became a hero herself, and the soldier who recognized that valor doesn't always wear a uniform. But Alina's greatest lesson isn't about the past, it's about the present. Every day, heroes walk among us, invisible to those who judge by appearance rather than character. The immigrant cleaning your office might be a former surgeon. The elderly woman you ignore at the bus stop might have saved lives you'll never know about. The quiet person serving your coffee might carry stories of courage that would humble kings. Rosa Martinez now speaks at schools across the country, teaching children that ordinary people can fight extraordinary evil. Her message is simple. You don't need superpowers to be a hero. You just need to see people others refuse to see, hear voices others choose to ignore, and never let injustice hide behind respectability. Captain James Mitchell's foundation has identified over 300 hidden heroes, survivors, refugees, and immigrants whose stories were nearly lost to time. Each one teaches us that we are surrounded by greatness we simply don't recognize. Courage, we fail to acknowledge, and wisdom we're too proud to hear. Alina often says, the most powerful moment wasn't when the Hartwells were arrested, but when Camila finally called her mama again. Evil tries to make us ashamed of who we are, Alina explains, but love reminds us that who we are is exactly who we were meant to be. The truth is, every one of us has walked past heroes without recognizing. Then we've dismissed people whose stories could change our lives. We've judged books by their covers and missed the chapters that could teach us everything about resilience, courage, and the unbreakable human spirit. If this story moved you, You have a responsibility not just to like and subscribe, but to see differently. Look for the Alina in your own life. Notice the Rosa who works quietly around you. Be the James who recognizes valor wherever it appears. Comment: I see heroes everywhere, if you commit to looking past appearances to find the extraordinary people hiding in plain sight. Every share helps someone else discover that heroism isn't rare. It's just invisible to those who don't know how to look. When you subscribe to our channel, you're not just getting more stories, you're joining a community of people who believe that every person has dignity, every story matters, and every voice deserves to be heard. We have hundreds of stories about hidden heroes whose courage will restore your faith in humanity. Remember, the next time you see someone being mocked, dismissed, or treated as invisible, you might be looking at the hero who will change everything. Alina Kozlov cleaned floors for 25 years while carrying the power to topple an empire. Who are you overlooking today? The most dangerous weapon against tyranny is a person who refuses to be forgotten, and the most powerful force for justice is someone who remembers that every human life has infinite worth.